Today's guest is Mike Kimel. He's the founder and CEO at Pricimetrics. So, Mike, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It sounds like it's going to be fun. I've listened to a few of your podcasts, and they do sound like informative and a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I just follow my curiosity, and one of the areas I'm very curious about is pricing.
I understand. Pricing actually, some people are curious, some people are actually terrified of pricing. In you know that I met with a company not long ago, and they told me they hadn't changed prices in several years. And why? Well, because when we changed prices last, we don't know if it worked or if it didn't. And a lot of companies are in that position. It's kind of one of those things that people are afraid of. A lot of people, you see an increase in price, and then despite that, unit sales go up. So, did the pricing not matter, or was that a function of something else that happened at the same time? Maybe your competitors raised prices even more at the same time, or there was some reason why demand picked up, or some crazy happenstance. There's all sorts of things that can happen. And pricing is kind of complicated. And so it's sometimes hard for people to pull apart this effect and that effect and so on and so forth. And so a lot of people end up getting just terrified. It's a lot of numbers. And quite frankly, people didn't get into the business to do pricing. Most people. I mean, I love it. Pricing is great. I enjoy it a lot. I'm a numbers guy. But most people, I mean, you're in the business because you like adhesive products. I mean, this is the thing that makes you want to get up in the morning. But pricing is kind of an extra that you have to deal
Well,
with.
well, I
And
don't know. I mean, I think it just, I think different people have different focuses. But let me dig into
sure,
how you got into the pricing side because it's not something that most people I hear. I went to school to become a pricing expert. So how do you kind of transition into what you're doing now?
actually, nobody ever asked me that question before. So, long story short, I actually I didn't go to school to become a pricing expert either. I got a PhD in economics from UCLA a very long time ago. And as a result, I was doing a lot of forecasting for different companies. And when you're the guy who does forecasting, you're not, you get into forecasting because you're not afraid of numbers. So a lot of people are afraid of numbers. And when you're not afraid of numbers, then all of a sudden they start asking you other questions. And can you help us with this? Or can you help us with that? And so, in a big enough company, you start answering questions that come from engineering, that come from marketing, that come from sales, all sorts of crazy things. Did our last set of ads
Break
work?
down some of the questions you were getting from these different departments.
Sure. I mean, like for instance, one classic one, and I talk about this one a lot, and it's related to pricing. It gets me into a lot of trouble in different companies. Is determining whether ads work. So a lot of companies they advertise, and sometimes the advertisements are big things like putting like a TV commercial. In other cases, it's a small thing like in a lot of retailers, you're going to find people arguing every week about what goes into the circular. This should be in the circular. Each department has its own champions that it wants in the circular. But did it work? Did it not? People don't seem to measure these things. So I would come in and I'd measure them. Things sometimes there'd be issues involving costs, for a telecom company, I looked into where the cable should be laid. Um, the, there's a lot of different things that involve numbers, and if you're willing to play with them, people ask you. And so, when you start doing things involving marketing, and I did a fair number of things involving marketing, then at some point, the question is, what about prices? Are we priced too high? Are we priced too low? Are we priced just right? What's priced too high? And so, I started playing with them. And it's easy, except it's easy when you're talking about one or two SKUs. But then most companies don't have one or two SKUs. Some of them,
Well,
well, I
walk
mean,
me through before you talk to me about the
sure.
complexity of it. Let's walk through, like, let's say your average simple company that have
Mhm.
one or two SKUs. They didn't take pricing seriously. If you were to come in, what's the framework you would apply or the steps you would apply to try to get to that price point that was close to optimal or optimum?
Okay. Well, first off, you have to remember every company is different, every business is different. However, there are some commonalities, and I'm going to stick to the commonalities. Obviously, there are we can talk about every exception under the sun, and I've seen a lot of them. And everything needs to be all these exceptions. Things have to be taken into account. But let's leave the exceptions aside and assume a quote generic skew. The economics widget, so to speak. Okay, so you're trying to sell widgets. What are you going to do? Ideally, you want to see you would like to maximize your profits over the long haul. That doesn't mean right in the short term, even though the long term is made up of a bunch of short terms. But what you want to do is you want to be able to get to a price where you're making the most profit you possibly can over the long run. If you charge too much in the short term, you could scare off customers. If you charge too little over the long term, you may never be able to get to the price that you want. One commonality that you see in a lot of industries and a lot of companies, if you lower prices, it's often very hard to raise prices back up. Um, on the other hand, if you have prices that are too high, sometimes you're not going to make it up. The volume is going to drop, and you're not going to sell enough of the product. Plus, if you price too high, it's not just that you have too much of the product. You also you end up having a lot of products stay with you. And so you might have aged inventory issues, a lot of industries and a lot of products, and some of them that you would never expect in a million years. I spent a lot of time in tires. The tires have aged inventory issues. I mean, they go bad after a while. So you don't want to end up with that, but you don't also want to end up with shortages of product, because if you end up with shortages of product, customers remember that too. They remember, hey, last time I went shopping at so and so store, they didn't have whatever I went looking for. And the week later, I went and they still didn't have it. So, if given a choice of places to shop, and limited time, I'm not going to go check there. I'm going to go to the place down the corner. They have a slightly higher price, but I know that they have it. So um, the right price is one that it will maximize your profit, but it does so also by keeping the customer happy. And you're keeping the customer happy both by not having aged inventory that sits there forever and by not having shortages and stockouts along the way. Ideally, what you're going to do is you observe when you change prices. And when you do change prices, what happened? Let's say I raised prices. If I raised prices, did my profits go down? If my profits went down, there's a good possibility that I didn't do the right thing. I didn't say it's a definite, because obviously there's a million other things happening and you want to be able to account for these things. So the accounting for all the other variables, the things that are happening, that's where things become a little bit complicated. Some of them you can keep track of in your head. in various simple businesses, and especially if you're only talking about one or two SKUs. Then you have some idea. Okay, the guy down the street. Well, when I raised prices, he raised prices at exactly the same time, just by coincidence, and he raised them by more. And so, my sales went up despite the fact that I raised prices. It's not it may not be that the customer is not price sensitive. It's that, hey, they're even more price sensitive to that guy. So there's a number of different things that ideally you do, and these include tracking what happened. Um, there are statistical methods, and I run a company, and we've built software to do this, that tracks all the different effects that you're observing out there, including, and again, it depends on the industry, it depends on whether they have the data, but was a product in ad at the time? What was do you have competing products, and if so, what happened to those competing products? Also, you yourself may be selling competing products. There's good, better, and best sometimes, or you might be selling, products that are symbiotic with. The classic outside of the construction business, of course, is hot dogs and hamburgers, hot dogs and hot dog buns. I mean, if the guy put hot dog buns in his shopping cart, if you're following someone around in a supermarket, hopefully not in a creepy way, but you're following a guy around, you see, hey, he put some hot dog buns in his shopping cart, you have a pretty good idea of what else is going in his shopping cart.
Isn't
Um,
that how consumer behavior research is done still with cameras and people following shoppers?
yes, it is. That's not my field at all. So, but I do know that they do occasionally do that. However, they don't have to do it quite as much as they used to, because uh, we have a lot of point of sale information these days. So, we've done work where you get baskets of purchases. Some companies are tracking, and they'll give you, all the items in a transaction, everything that the customer bought. And then in those cases, you can tell there was the hot dog and the hot dog bun, even without following the guy, following shoppers around.
Yeah, I mean, so it sounds like every company has to create their a model of pricing, right? Like there's the fundamentals that you mentioned, right? Your price, what you're changing, what happens, right? But then with your own products internally competing with maybe new products, raw material costs, what your competitors are doing. It feels like, you've been doing this for a bunch of different companies. Each company has their own model they built around that.
Yes and no. There are certain ones that are completely different. I was talking to a guy in the lumber business the other day, and apparently his price changes several times a day. Or, he drives up to some mills, and he leaves the mill. His price is different than it was before he showed up at the mill, and a few hours later, he's at another mill, and now he's got a different price. And so that's kind of an extreme situation. But then you might have a Lowe's or a Home Depot, and in that case, maybe they're selling paint. Um, and that's a little bit more of a standard type issue. Now, what we did with our software is that we made the software as much as possible self-adaptive, which means that it can account for a lot of different information, a lot of different fields. And the important thing is to track the fields, and as long as the data is, more or less sequential, the software is able to decide for itself, this variable matters, and it matters in this way. or when we've for instance, this particular can of paint made by this brand, it's affected by the price of this brand and that brand. But you know what? That other brand, we never see it affect that. So
Mm,
it's going to, so the software is able to learn to ignore that brand but take into account the price of these two brands. So it'll come back with recommendations like uh, you want to be priced at this amount, but you also want to account for, you don't want to be more than say 30 cents or a buck or whatever above the price of that brand, and
yeah,
this other brand you want to be below that price. You
yeah.
really
I
want to
mean,
come in below.
this sounds like you need to understand the throughput of competitors.
In many industries, yes. In many businesses, yes. In some businesses, that either it doesn't affect things. In some cases, customer behavior differs from business to business, and in other cases, it may affect things, but we'll never know because that data is not available. And a lot of wholesale businesses, um, the data is not available, or at least it's not available systematically. And so the software in that case is going to, like any human being, do the best it can with what it has. But unless you're going to make up data or make up information, it's going to work without,
Yeah.
because it doesn't have it.
Yeah, I mean, so how do you what are the different ways you can collect data to bring into this? Because it sounds like it's all about data.
It's about data, and it's about organizing the data, quite frankly, and finding patterns in the data. Now, I enjoy finding patterns in the data, and so we kind of trained the software to do the same thing, and I had a blast doing it, and it continues to be a blast. Getting data, for most purposes, we rely on the customer, because, quite frankly, look, you know your business much better than I do. If you came to me and asked me to do your pricing for you, I mean, the way it would work is, first things first, we need to have a long conversation, and you need to teach me about your business. And among that information that hopefully I would get from you would be things like, who are your competitors and where can I get information about them? And ideally, in most cases, you would be collecting some information about them, if at all possible. The likelihood that we can collect that data is lower than the likelihood that you can. We do collect certain data that we use. However, that's data that we feel it's much easier for us to collect than for you being whoever the customer might be. So, for instance, we collect certain economic releases, and that information gets fed into our data set. One thing that's on our to-do list, we have not gotten to yet. We will be collecting at a certain point weather information. You can collect weather information by zip code in the United States, for instance. There are certain things for which weather matters. I mean, certain projects in the construction business, for instance, you're not going to do in the winter. So knowing that, hey, it started to snow, and odds are it's going to continue snowing for a bit. Okay, that affects prices, and it affects what's going to move off the shelf if you're Lowe's or Home Depot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it sounds like having well, as a pricing professional, having a broad understanding of various economic or changes or trends is helpful.
It is, but those are secondary to the business. So, for instance, I can show you that, look, right now the broader economy is growing by whatever. But that doesn't mean your business is growing by whatever. And it also doesn't mean that you should be increasing your price by whatever. So we are trying to, those are overlays and there are additional information that gets fed into the model, and the software is, going through its calculations to determine this variable is affecting this product in this location at this time, or it isn't. But the main thing that it learns from, the most important thing are transactions. It's trying to pick up, okay, when we're raising prices, this is what we're seeing customers do. When we're lowering prices, this other thing is what we're seeing customers do. And in fact, the software does occasionally suggest, I don't want to call it experiments, but for lack of a better term. So if it sees like you've got a product and I'm pretty sure the right price for this product is $40 per unit or whatever. The software may at certain points say to itself, I'm becoming a bit less sure that it's $40 per unit. And it's been a while, so I haven't actually observed what happens with price changes on this product. Is it possible for you to charge $41 per unit next for the next 2 weeks? And or it might come back with how about $39 per unit? And it will actually make these suggestions to you, which of course you can override. The important thing with our software is that we're walking into this. So we consciously thought about this when we built it. Look, whatever industry we're dealing with, the people the people know their business better than we do. And
Sure.
so the ability to override whatever the software is doing is always there. You don't. It's not a dictator.
Yeah. The robots aren't taking over yet, right?
Not yet. I mean, although we could have coded it to not listen to you, but that probably wouldn't have been smart.
Very cool. If someone wanted to learn more about pricing in general, where would they be looking? What books would they be reading?
Um, there are some classics in the field, but they're not really they're not really lay people oriented. They're more for if you've got yourself a degree in economics. I would say that there are blogs that you'll find online. There are people on LinkedIn, for instance, that you will find who write regularly about pricing. I'm trying to write more myself, but I'm not writing regularly enough. I don't have the time for it. The reality, though, is that the dirty little secret is that pricing is like everything else. Um, you read a little bit about it, you read a little bit here and there, but then you stop and you think, because there's always a lot of garbage that people say, and a lot of it is generic. Um, it comes down to something I said earlier. When we're setting up the model for somebody, when he's setting up the software, it comes down to the person's own knowledge matters a great deal. And look, I can come and I can pontificate for the next 2 hours. Look, I like talking as much as anybody else. Okay, I can sit here and I can talk, 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 talk. But some of what I will say, if I do not listen to you about your business, some of what I will say will be nonsense. So the right place to start is thinking about your business and asking yourself, how do customers react when I do X? How do customers react when I do Y? And sometimes you'll know this from an intuitive perspective. But the other thing that I would strongly suggest if you really want to learn a lot more about pricing, it's not even so much reading, it is collecting information on your own transactions and putting them in Excel, let's say, and graphing them. The best tool is usually the human eyeball and your own gut. So you can learn a tremendous amount simply by staring at your own data, trying to maybe graph it, like squint a little bit and look sideways. And I'm not kidding, but sometimes you got to play with it. You got to move things around in order to see the patterns. I mean, this is all about patterns, and it's about patterns of human behavior. It's about the patterns of the people who are buying from you. They behave in ways that usually have patterns. That's human behavior. It's fascinating stuff, and you can put numbers on it.
Perfect, Mike. I can feel your passion for pricing. I appreciate you helping us navigate it today.
Yeah, it's a blast, and I really appreciate you having me.